So ever since I was little, I always had an incredible need for speed.
Kiana's been very unique very early in her childhood. So it was one of those things, and she's kind of lived that whole way through her entire life, where she's just basically saw something where she wanted to do and just found a way to make it happen. And very focused and driven on doing stuff like that, but just an adrenaline junkie since day one.
There was this huge hill behind my grandpa's house, and I would get on my rollerblades or my skateboard or my BMX bike, and I would go as fast as I could possibly go down that hill. I hated going slow. Even on the swings, my dad would have to push me like an extra 2 pushes just so I can get that adrenaline rush. But my dad noticed and picked it up very quickly. Hey, this kid loves to go fast. And him and his buddies were into dirt bikes. And so he ended up getting me a PW80, and I swung my leg over that bike. It wasn't anybody trying to force me to do it. I did it because I genuinely loved it.
One of those things where it's always been in her to go fast, do different things. We bought her a bike, it had training wheels on it, and she started wanting to get into motorcycles. And I told her, I said, you're not gonna get into motorcycles till you can ride your bike back then without training wheels on it. I was out working a lot during the time, and Kiana was determined she was gonna ride a motorcycle. So what she did was she went to the neighbor across the street and she said, hey, Rich, my dad's working and he was asking, hey, can you go ahead and take off my training wheels real quick so I could start learning how to ride. And Rich was like, are you sure your dad said that? And Kiana was like only 4 years old at the time. And she's like, yeah, my dad said it was fine. Rich does it, takes off the training wheels, does everything else. I come home a couple days later after a business trip, and then Kiana's out in the front yard. She's like, oh, Dad, guess what? I got a surprise for you. And I was like, what's that? And then we go out in the garage, she grabs her bike, it doesn't have training wheels on it, and she just starts ripping around the neighborhood, jumping off the curbs and everything. And she's like, you made a promise, you gotta buy me a motorcycle now. And I was like, yeah, you're right, I do gotta buy one now, so.
My dad took me to Banning, California, and we started riding around, and it was just completely open field, and I grabbed a handful of front brake, and I went over the bars. Oh, this stuff sucks. I banged myself up pretty good, and then I get back in the car, and my dad was, what did you think about it? I was like, oh no, screw this. And then the very next morning, I went into my dad's room, like, so when are we going riding again? So the very first day that I got on my 80, I went over the handlebars and I was just instantly hooked on it. I just loved motocross more than anything in the world. My dad saw just how determined I was to keep riding. He ended up taking me to get a KX85. The race gas, it sounded like a bumblebee. Like, I was just so amped about it. Started racing very heavily to the point where my teachers actually called my parents and, yeah, so your kid is missing a lot of school. You do know that she has to have an education, right? And my dad was like, that's where she's at. Like, this is her #1 and we're gonna support her in it. My parents were incredibly flexible with school, which was insane to me. So I would get home from school and my dad would be like, all right, backyard, we're doing gates, we're gonna do a little corner track, we're practicing, and then when the sun goes down, then you'll do homework. And to have the people there just so supportive it's the coolest community out of all the action sports I've ever been in. It didn't matter that I was a girl, it didn't matter I was an 85. I was there to ride bikes and I was looked at as one of the boys. I love it because I don't, like, my limits are kind of like unlimited at that point.
Kiana always had this thing about speed. I mean, she would be on a small bike or tricycle and she'd go up to the top of the hill, and we were living in Lake Elsinore. Her grandfather at the time was living in an apartment complex, and there was this huge drop down where all the parking was. So the parking was up here and it dropped down to where the apartments were. And her grandpa would be watching for cars, and she'd get her tricycle up and she'd just like start ripping and gripping going down. It made it so it was actually a lot of fun, because since I did ride, I raced BMX. Once I saw that passion in her, it made it so it was a lot easier of a transition. But then we started getting into motorcycles and she was riding, but it was me and my friends that pretty much got her into it. I wanted Kiana to do whatever made her happy. And for her, she wanted to go and she wanted to be quick. And if she wanted to be in Barbies, we'd have bought a whole bunch of Barbies. But her whole thing was just being competitive. It was one thing with the boys, she always enjoyed riding with them because they made her better. But it was always a lot different because once she started riding with the boys, she was like, I'm not gonna learn from you, I'm gonna start beating you. Raise that level of competition, because back then, there weren't nearly as many girls riding, so it was one of those things where they were few and far between as far as the real talented girls. So she started racing with boys, and then when she started beating the boys in her own age group, she started racing with the next class up. Anything that she wants to set her mind to, the same thing happened with snowboarding. We took her out snowboarding, and then she started getting into that, surfing, you name it. So she's just really been very active driven since I can remember.
We were hitting races every single weekend. I had plans to go pro. I was idolizing and looking up to like Ashley Feilich, Tara Geiger, seeing all their success with like X Games and how they were actually progressing the sport of motocross. I was like, I want to be a part of that. I really wanted to be the best, no matter what that looked like, whether it was putting school to the side, friendships aside. But the way that I've been able to like bond with my dad, me and my dad grew like this really awesome relationship and had so much windshield time to just talk, where I think a lot of my maturity comes from my childhood of racing, because if you fall, you have to get back up and finish the race. It builds your character, it builds who you are as a person. But what I've learned over my entire lifespan is that it's not about winning, it's about being there with your friends and making really good memories and bonding with your family and creating those relationships. My best memories of my childhood is racing, for sure. Just a regular night race. My dad was just like, hey, we need to practice before this Women's Cup over Thanksgiving weekend. I'd say about 3 days, it was raining every single day. So that track was muddy. My dad helped me get my helmet on, and I looked out, there were like little kids on 65s that were getting stuck. Parents had to come pick them up. I go out there and my bike starts getting caked with mud pretty heavily. I go into a corner, freaked out, and because of all the mud ruts and stuff, and I tipped over. But the mud was so thick that 2 guys actually had to jump the fence and help me pick up my bike, so I wasn't able to get it out of the mud. So I go around the track, finish the 1 lap that I did, and I crossed the finish line, landed, but since I had absolutely no traction, my back tire slid out and I was laying down, and all I remember seeing was the flagger looking at me, and it immediately went black.
Well, it's one of those things you never in a million years expect yourself in. Another rider came over and landed right on her. At that moment, my heart dropped, because here's a jump 30, 40 feet long, and he just landed right basically on top of my daughter's neck. When we got there, Kiana was still knocked out, and then as soon as she started to wake up a little bit, she was freaking out, and as a dad, I was happy just to see her breathing after that type of an impact. The medics were like, can you feel this, can you do that, can you do that, and then all of a sudden she couldn't feel her arm, and that's when things started going a little bit more crazy, and then it was a very scary experience.
Broke my neck and ripped all the nerves out of my spinal cord. My helmet ripped off, my eyes were rolled back, and I was just shaking on the floor, like my body went into shock. All I remember is that I woke up on the back of a stretcher. When you black out and you wake up, you naturally just try to move everything in your body, and I tried moving all my limbs, and I was like, I can't move my arm. I tried like moving it and feeling it, and I was like, I can't feel my arm. And then I just started screaming. I was like, I can't move my arm, I can't move my arm. And I just started freaking out and started crying hysterically. And I was supposed to be care flighted out. I wasn't. I was actually put in the ambulance, and I was taken to 3 different hospitals. And the first hospital, they tried to tell me that my shoulder was dislocated. The second hospital said that I had a pinched nerve. And we finally went to Children's Medical Center in Dallas, where they actually diagnosed me with brachial plexus injury. I would say that was probably the worst week of my life. I couldn't sleep at all. They were constantly pricking me with needles, giving me shots, giving me IVs, running x-rays. That was the first time I ever saw my dad like cry hysterically in the hospital room. My mom was just beside herself. My family ended up flying out and started to help and stuff. So I was in the hospital for a while, and I was in a neck brace for about a year. It's crazy to think that the morning that I went racing, I was a fully able, perfectly healthy person. And then going home, I was going home with only 1 hand. The first first 3 months, I'd say I hated dirt bikes. I remember when they were taking me with a catheter and giving me shots and giving me all in IVs, all of this at the exact same time. They had absolutely no regard for the fact that I was a little 12-year-old girl. Couldn't go to school. I lost a lot of friends because the other thing that's been incredibly hard to adapt to immediately when I broke my neck was the phantom pain that came along with it. But people don't know that paralysis comes with severe neuropathy pain. So people, their nerves will either be stretched or damaged or pinched. Mine were ripped out of my neck. So I've talked to multiple doctors about this, and they said that I experienced the worst pain a human being can experience from their own body on a daily basis 24/7. And it's actually gotten so bad where my nerve pain can shoot up randomly and it'll actually make me black out.
You know, I had my relationship with God, but I never prayed as much as I did during that time. You don't know what's going on, so you're real scared. You just had a bunch of doctors coming in telling you different things, so you're actually at a loss because you have doctors pointing you in a direction, they find out, oops, we made a mistake, we're going in a different direction, because there wasn't a lot of experience with brachial plexus injuries. So once we got her over to Children's, things kind of escalated really quick because she was in ICU for a few weeks. The whole process of what happens when you break your neck, and we found out about the brachial plexus injury and such. So it was a very trying time. Since we did have a few different, physicians and such and providers that dropped the ball as far as diagnosing and going through the process, I really didn't want to leave it in the hands of somebody who was questioning themselves. So what I did is I stopped working. We took her up to University of Washington in St. Louis, and we ended up staying there for months at a time because they had the best doctors there for that. So we ended up staying at the Ronald McDonald House. I wasn't working, I was constantly up there. My wife at the time, she was working. She basically maintained everything in Texas while I was up there taking care of Kiana. But as far as motorcycles go, I didn't even think about it because my only focus was taking care of Kiana, making sure she was getting everything that she needed to progress and everything that she needed to get better. So we just spent a lot of time with the recovery, with PT, but then once we got home, we were able to take it in a little bit, and then Kiana was, she realized that she wasn't gonna be able to move that arm again moving forward, and it was just looking pretty bleak as far as that goes. So that's when we made the decision, we'll start divesting ourselves a little bit from the motocross, and that's what made it so it was a little bit more difficult because she felt very challenged when she went to the track because she loves it, she wanted to be out there, and it was also just difficult for her to go out there and seeing other people doing what she loved. So we just kind of sat back and worked with physical therapy and everything else, going through the motions of trying to get her better. During that time when you're traveling and going through all those expenses, everything gets expensive very, very quick. So I unloaded a few of those things that were just toys at the time just to make sure that I didn't have any worries about being up there for 4, 5, 6 months. No, I wasn't involved in the community at all. I'd still watch races, and I still had friends who were checking in on Kiana all the time, but I did not go to tracks. I didn't do any of those things just because I was always making sure that I was focused on Kiana.
The doctor pretty much said, you have absolutely no chance of getting your arm back. Like, this is what it is at this point. Like, you can do PT and stuff, but it's not gonna do much for you. I still continued to do PT for about a year, actually 2 years, just to make sure that for some miracle, if something was to come back, that like my arm would be in good condition to be strong, but it never happened. But also being 12 years old and going through natural changes of being a girl, like going through puberty and actually caring about what your hair looks like, learning about makeup. Okay, are boys even gonna like me because I have one arm? Am I gonna be able to have friends? What is it gonna look like for sports? So when my injury first happened, I was at that age where I was trying to figure things out, figure out who I was, all the girl things, on top of figuring out how to be a newly disabled person. Immediately when I went home, I didn't really know how to actually even take a bath. So my mom actually had to help me take a shower for over a year. Just the fact of having to figure out how to tie my shoes again, I was dominant in my right hand, so I actually had to reteach myself how to write. It was a lot to take in at once. So I ended up going back to school. My teachers were actually very, very big supporters during that entire time. My peers really treated me differently. How do I go about life? Like, how do I go about living? And just doing daily things was so weird. I remember when I was trying to make my lunch and I said, screw this, and I just ended up not eating lunch because I couldn't even make my own lunch. I'll figure out how to do it. It might take longer or it might not be good enough for some people, but I'll figure out how to do it rather than asking someone for help. So from that point forward, I was like, all right, I'm gonna do everything my own. I don't have motocross anymore. I don't have this anymore. It's not possible, so what's my purpose now? And so I tried to figure out what was going to fulfill me the same way that moto did. And so I ended up, for middle school and high school, I tried out for absolutely everything. I did track, cross country, drill team, cheerleading, choir. I did every single art class. I was actually trying to go to college for art, but it didn't fulfill me the way that motocross did. None of it did. And on top of that, I got bullied a lot. There's a lot of things that come with paralysis that people just don't understand, especially when the pain gets that that bad. Like you don't want to leave your room. You don't want to be around people because you know that like you're gonna bring that bad energy with you and it's gonna affect others around you. And I remember the first time I experienced the phantom pain, like I fell on the ground and I just started screaming, and my mom just stood there and she didn't know how to help me. Had to sit there and watch me deal with it on my own and be like, I can't help my kid because there's legitimately nothing that can help with it. Felt very lost. I felt very alone. I felt very depressed. I didn't really know what my purpose was anymore.
I was just at the impression that I didn't think she was going to get back on the bike. She's done. We're just going to step back. We're going to find something that doesn't involve motorcycles, motors, you name it.
I started hanging out at the tracks again. Guy that I really liked, and he introduced me to this guy named Connor, and he was like, yeah, you know, we can probably rig up a pig bike for you so you can at least ride around the pit. So we sat there and just started brainstorming all these different ideas on how we can rig up a pit bike. So we'll just move the throttle over to the left side. I ended up borrowing this really old set of gear, got on this pit bike, and we moved the throttle to the left. And so I get out there, and there was this little pit bike track on the side of the big track. I'm just gonna go hang out over there. You guys go have fun. I'm gonna go do my thing. I start getting comfortable with it. I spent the entire day on that track. The entire day. I think I went through like 2 or 3 gallons of gas, and my parents had no idea. Not even the slightest. So it turned into a weekly thing. Every weekend I would go out and just rip this little pit bike and hang out with my friends and just enjoy being back to riding. When I sat on that bike, I'll never leave moto. Like, there's no way. You can take every single limb of my body, but I'll still figure out a way to ride. Parents were on Facebook, kids were on Facebook, everybody was on Facebook. And this photographer decides to post my picture on Facebook and was like, look at this chick riding with one arm, this is like so sick. And now I gotta tell my parents, because I can't hide that. And so I sit them both down in the living room and I was like, hey, you're gonna see a picture of me riding, and I just wanted to make sure that you were hearing it from me first before you found out, but I am riding dirt bikes again. And it'd be really cool if you can support me. If not, that's totally fine, but this is what makes me happy. This is the first time in like a really long time that actually I feel like myself. I was bawling my eyes out telling them this because of just how happy I was. It was almost like that little KX 110 just like gave a piece of me back.
After she started hanging out with the friends again, and then she was telling her friends that she wanted to do it, she started off on a small pit bike and just kind of, you know, zooming around the pits, having fun with her friends. And then she's like, I can control the bike better than I thought I would. I could do things I didn't think I'd be able to do. And that's when she started doing it with her friends. So I wasn't even aware that this was happening at the time. So I've got my kid out there doing this stuff. And then after, you know, she was talking to her friends at the time, they said, you really should get your dad more involved. And then so once I went out and I saw her riding the pit bike, I told her, I can't say I agree with it 100%, but I want you to do what's best for you. But I don't want you to be doing it on a pit bike that you and your friends put together. And that's when I started working with different dealers and different parts and just becoming very driven to research what would be the best, safest solution for her. And that's when we came up with the different mods that we did for a bike and making sure the suspension was dialed in, the steering stabilizer, and you name it, A to Z. But I just wanted to make sure that if I was supporting her doing it, that I was putting her on the safest equipment that she could have out there for her disability.
I didn't feel like myself for a really long time. It was almost like I lost a part of myself. And so just getting back on that KX, it gave me a hope. I wanted to go out there and ride because I genuinely love it. Being really good parents. Like, it sounds harsh, but they really were. Like, they saw me break my neck. They didn't want me to go and participate in the sport that can potentially kill me. I have that tunnel vision problem where if I have my mind set on something, I'm gonna do it. Like, nobody can tell me otherwise. And my dad was like, I know you're that type of person, so even if I sit here and tell you no, I don't want you to hide it from me. I wanna make sure you're on the best stuff, and I'll help you buy equipment that's gonna set you up and protect you. So my dad actually went half on my 150 that I ended up getting. I I had so much fun on that bike. So basically what we ended up doing is we got a Scott's Performance steering stabilizer, which goes underneath the handlebars, so it helps me from getting head shake and getting shaky. And then we moved the throttle over to the left side and it rolls forward. And then the front brake is also on the left side. And we have a recluse clutch. So basically you just dry shift, you don't really have to use the lever at all. But those are all the modifications that I have. It really is a simple modification process to make that bike work. It was a small bike, but it was still kind of a big bike. Like it was a good little middle, you're not going to insanely hurt yourself on this thing. So it was a really, really good step from obviously the 110 because the corners were nicer. I felt a lot safer on the jumps. I actually had a practice that I could go be in. Every single track that I've ever been to has been super supportive, and they always let me ride with the 85s and the younger kids, sometimes even 65s. And the parents of the 65s are super cool about it too. North Texas MX, they raised money during my accident to help my parents pay for medical bills. The best support that I ever received was not only from my family, but my moto family. And the one caveat that I had with my dad was, he was like, I'll help you with this, but you can't race. That's totally fine with me, that's cool. And then, you know, kind of like how me getting back on the bike happened, that's also how my first race happened. It was at Village Creek and it was at a night race. And I get on the gate and my adrenaline just like kicked up and all these butterflies started coming back. And I was like, I don't gotta tell my parents, this is totally fine. Like I know my limitations, like finish the race. And then I just immediately called my dad and I was like, hey, just so you know, I raced. But that led me into a bunch of racing. Turns out that motorsport adaptive was a thing then. Doug Henry was racing it, Mike Schultz was racing it, and a bunch of other disabled riders, whether they're in wheelchairs, had one arm like me, one leg, no legs, all prosthetics. So it was really cool to not only have my own adaptive community, but adaptive moto community. That was just so cool. I actually ended up being the very first adaptive female to compete ever. That gave me so much motivation and just, yeah, this is where I belong. Like, these are my people. If you have a disability or any type of negative circumstance or just a circumstance in general, you can make it however you want it to be. No one's going to stop you from doing what you want to do but you. Your parents can say don't do it, your friends cannot support you, everybody in your community can say you're stupid for chasing this, but it's up to you if you're going to make that happen and if you're going to make it good or if you're going to make it bad. The power is all set in your hands.
It's one of those things that it makes you really proud as a father. It makes you sit back and think, I didn't make a bunch of mistakes because this kid's doing it. And not only doing it independently. And I sit back and I become a fan. I'm just sitting back and I'm watching because this is her moment, this is her life. And so I sit back and I let her do what she needs to do, and Kiana's very independent. If she needs help, she asks for help. But besides that, I try to be there and give her a little bit of guidance if I could see some places where she might be able to make up some speed on a track, or if she's trying to do something that I don't think is within her skill set. I try to leave her to doing her own path. And if I can assist, awesome. If I can't, then she surrounded herself with really good people who can. Because I'll be the first one to tell you I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I like being in the room with smart people. So if they could give her guidance that I can't, that's what I like to see. And she's a very passionate communicator about what she does. And when we're at the track, we'll see somebody come up in a wheelchair, we'll see somebody come up with a broken arm, and they're like, man, I thought motorcycles for me was done, but watching go out there and do it, I realize it's not. It's just a different obstacle, just like the track is. It just adds another variable to it. So I just like the fact that she's able to go out, do those things, and motivate other people who have disabilities not give up on motorcycles, but still ride. When you sit back and you think about it as a parent, sometimes you think, what is the safest path? And sometimes the safest path isn't to become a pro snowboarder. Sometimes the safest path isn't to see your kid go try to skateboard a dew tour. It's one of those things where you're like, okay, let's see what's next. So you just kind of, like I said before, you kind of just end up letting them have their space to expand. But one of the things I think that was really important for Kiana's development as well is sometimes I thought to myself, you're gonna fall. Sometimes I thought to myself, even when she was like younger and she's trying to hit this one double one time, she was practicing, I knew in the back of my head, you're not gonna make it. But I let her do it. And the reason why is because I wanted her to see what it felt like to fail, felt like to come up a little bit short and what adjustments she needs to make inside of herself to make it so it does it. But I think that she's done a great job of testing the boundaries, testing her abilities, making it so she's able to do different things and just never being content with just what she's doing, but always looking for the next step and the next thing that she could do. No matter what, I try to be as positive with her as I can and just give her as much reinforcement on positives and negatives of what I think she's doing. But I think the most important thing is just allowing her to try what she thinks she could do. And then if she ends up coming up short, make adjustments and we try again. But that doesn't mean you give up. It just means that you have the opportunity to learn from your mistakes and to try again. I think that she has so many good things and so many good traits to offer that right now she's just gonna end up expanding and using those things to benefit others. Because one of the things that Kiana's really passionate about is she could have her successes and she does the things that she thinks is really cool. But one of the things I've always admired about Kiana is if she goes and she does really well, she's happy. But if she goes with her friends and she sees her friends do really well, she's even happier. And the reason why is because she's always been that person that's just wanted to be part of that group that says, sure, everybody has their success, but if you could make the whole team successful or everybody around you successful, you've done a lot more than just being successful as a person.
Some days I have a hard time with having one arm. Like, I'm not always an inspirational, motivational person. I'm still human. There's days where I'm like, this sucks. Like, what the heck is the point? Okay, but now we're gonna be productive because I let myself feel those feels, but let's go to the gym, get some endorphins kicking in, let's get that blood flow going because that's gonna make me feel better. It's always about the little things that is going to encourage your mental health. And again, it's not always about winning. You gotta take care of yourself before anything else, because if you're not taking care of yourself, everything else around you falls apart. I have a really, really, really good team and support system of coaches and family and friends, and those people are my rock. Those are the people that I turn to for truth and reminding me who I am and what I'm here to do.
There's other people, there's other parents, because I've spoke with other parents as well that are going through similar situations because they're just looking for guidance in some path that others have found and they're able to move on and do some of these other things. And one of the things that I always try to share with people is like, Kiana is very unique because of the way she thinks, because of the way she acts, because of the challenges that she had, and her challenges have actually made her a stronger person. But every kiddo and every person is gonna develop different. So the best thing that as a parent you could do is find the things that your kid is passionate about. Once you find those things, inspire them to do them more, inspire them to do them better, inspire them to help people around them, do any of those types of things. That's exactly what Kiana's done, and I couldn't be more proud because she's really taken it to another level as far as what I was expecting. And she's also made it so that she's put higher expectations on herself because every day she wants to do a little bit better than she did yesterday.
If anything, I'm just insanely grateful for my accident. You know, it was a really hard road. It still is a very hard road. The really cool people I've been able to meet, the relationships I've been able to build, the opportunities that it's given me, and the fact that it gives me a really unique way to glorify God and to reach people on a more personal, like emotional level is just so awesome. Anytime that I get on a bike, I just know this is why I'm here on this planet. I'm gonna ride till the day I die.